As you know, on Sunday night or Monday morning of every week, we post a new expository semiotics explaining why we would choose which lectionary readings. But in these readings, our dream is, and our desire is, to help you read the signs and fondle the details and spot the seminal metaphors, the condensed signs and the stories that are key for preaching to a digital culture. So strap on your seatbelt and join us as we prospect our passages for today. Welcome to the third Sunday in Lent, 2022, March 20th. Our lectionary passages today, Isaiah 55, 1-9. This great section here in verse 8-9. My thoughts are not your thoughts. My ways are not your ways. God reminding us that, God's basic category is infinite. Our basic category is finite. I can't even understand something that never was and always will, that always was and always will be. Because I had a beginning, I have an end. God has no beginning, no end. So it's just the whole concept of infinite. Infinity is beyond me. But it's another way of God reminding us here in this passage from Isaiah that God is God and I am not. God is God and you are not. It's a little morning ritual I have. I look in the mirror and I go, God is God and I am not. Or you are not, Sweet. Because the whole culture is saying, you are God. Have it your way. You're number one. You deserve it. Our Psalm 63, 1-8, would not be, it's a great Psalm. You, O God, are my God. My soul thirsts for you. But it's not one of the Psalms are songs, and it's not one of the greatest hits Psalms, like 23, the Lord is my shepherd, like 42, as the deer panteth for the waters, although that song that's been around for like 35 years, as the deer. I think somebody needs to give it some water so we can sing another song. Psalm 46, be still and know that I am God. Or I'm thinking of Psalm 130, out of the depths, or Psalm 137, by the rivers of Babylon. These are the greatest hits of the Psalms. This is a great one, but it's not one of those greatest hits. Although you could do, as we are fasting in Lent, a hunger and thirsting psalm like this is really, really appropriate. The epistle reading, 1 Corinthians 10, 1-13. If you think you are standing, beware. The passage that I want to spend some time on and that I want to do a little semiotics with is Luke 13, 1-9. And this is a passage that's really strange because it ends abruptly. There's no resolution, it just ends. And, well, where's the ending? There is no ending. Okay. And this, it's a sort of a fig tree. We got a lot of fig trees. Now, I suspect, this is total, this is not gospel. This is just Leonard Sweet here. But I suspect the tree of the knowledge of good and evil was a fig tree. We know it wasn't an apple tree. I suspect it was a fig tree. But here's a fig tree that is not bearing fruit. And we are being told here that there is a way in which that fig tree can be saved. Repent. Dig a ditch that surrounds the tree and fill the ditch with manure. Okay. Now, there's a real question here is whether manure or fertilizer. Now, manure is fertilizer, but fertilizer is not manure. So you gotta, if you want to save that tree, first you got to dig into the soil, and you got to dig deep into your soul, into the soil of your spirit, and so after you do some digging, you gotta kind of upturn the soil and give it some air, and then you add this manure, and that's where it ends. I mean, basically, it's saying if you don't add the manure and dig it up and add the manure, it's done. And if that doesn't work, it's done. I did a little research here on, okay, the question becomes, what did they use as manure? Now, you think you know what manure is, but manure, again, can also mean fertilizer, and one of the fertilizers they use, manure is manure, but one of the fertilizers that they use, and sometimes on top of the manure, is salt. Wait a minute. Yeah. Sea salt contains up to 90 minerals that plants need to grow healthy and strong. So you use it in moderation, and Lent is all about moderation. But when you use it in moderation, it's a very inexpensive, organic fertilizer, and helps a lot of plants and vegetables and more to grow. And so there is here some interesting implications that when Jesus says, you are the salt of the earth, we think of salt as a preservative, but salt's also used as a fertilizer, as a manure, as something that goes with dung to bring growth. Sometimes, you got to stink things up a little bit with that dung. What this fig tree is being told, you got to dung it for it to bear some fruit, and the fertilizer, the growing, is Jesus really also calling us the dung of the earth, the manure of the planet. By the way, every sacrifice had to be salted. Even grain, when it was made into this little pancake, you had to salt it. And so here, I would, if I were you, I would have fun with this, but in a very serious way. What does it mean that you and I are the dung of the earth, the manure of the planet, and what does it mean to dung it? As we're to save the tree, save the world, and I want us to think about how Jesus handled the manure people, the dung people, the people that were not wanted, and the people that didn't fit in. The dung of the earth. I learned from Sheila Walsh at a conference I attended not too long ago about something I'd never heard of before. I don't come from a shepherding tradition, so there's something called bummer lambs. And I know the phrase bummer. Well, that's a bummer. And I actually looked it up to see if that word bummer came from this tradition of bummer lambs. It doesn't seem to, although there's a lot of unclarity about how we get that phrase as we know it today. What a bummer. You're a bummer. Don't be a bummer. But the tradition of the bummer lambs is a very old one. And what a bummer lamb is sometimes when lambs are born to an ewe, the mother rejects the lamb. The mother ewe rejects the lamb and says, I want nothing to do with you. It could be they don't like the smell. It could be the lamb that's being born is a little stunted. It could be that the ewe dies, so you've got an orphan lamb. But they're called bummer lambs. And what does a shepherd do with all these bummer lambs? Maybe the mother ewe doesn't have enough milk for all of the kids that she's had. So And once a ewe rejects a lamb, it is final. I mean, there's no going back. If a mother, there's nothing you do to cajole her or coerce her or convince her to take that lamb back. So you've either you got to do something with that lamb. Now, if you let that lamb go for very long, you can always tell a bummer lamb, a shepherd can, that it's been rejected because they have their head down, and they feel that rejection, and they will die. Even some food won't help them because their spirit is their mother has rejected them at birth. And with their heads down, the shepherd knows the bummer lamb. So what shepherds do is they take the bummer lambs, a bummer lamb or more, into their home, and they nurse it themselves. But the key to bringing that bummer lamb to life is the shepherd has to hold it close. That bummer lamb has to feel its heartbeat. You have to sing to it and talk to it, and so it can hear the sounds of love and affection. And that bummer lamb literally gets brought back to life, and can be returned to the flock by the love and attention and care of the shepherd. Isaiah 40:11, he tends his flock like a shepherd. He gathers the lambs in his arms and carries them close to his heart. He gently leads those that have young. Jesus loved bummer lambs. In fact, he was attacked because he loved bummer lambs. This is the greatest insult. And for me, this is the greatest indictment against all organized religion and every bureaucracy, are these words that Jesus was accused of in the temple. This man receives sinners still. He spends his time with bummer lamb people, with bummer people. He spends his time with the rejected and the despised and the outcast and the dung of the earth. Jesus spends his time with those people. And let me give you some types of bummer lambs that Jesus spent his time with. And it's hard for us to understand this, but Jesus' treatment of women was absolutely revolutionary for his day. In first century Palestine, a woman's social sphere was only as large as her family. She had nothing outside of that. Men didn't speak directly to women, especially strangers. And the Gospels, over and over again, Jesus is speaking directly to women, and he does so with a degree of tenderness and attentiveness that is it is shocking if you know the context in which this takes place. And the only time he uses the Greek word for daughter of a living person is of a bummer lamb woman who'd been hemorrhaging for how many years? And he calls her daughter. She'd been rejected by her family. She's been outcast for 12 years. And he calls her daughter. The only time he uses the word son of a living person is that paralytic who had been orphaned by his family, just outcast. He's a disabled person. The family didn't want to deal with him, so they just dumped him and ran. And his father has betrayed him and dumped him. The dung of the earth, a bummer lamb. And Jesus looks at him, first word to him, son, daughter. When he addresses the woman double over from spiritual oppression, Luke 13:16, he calls her a daughter of Abraham. The hemorrhaging woman, his daughter of Abraham. And who's the first people he made his post-resurrection appearance to? Women whose testimony, whose word had no standing in court and couldn't have standing in court. in an era with gender segregation that was kept very strict. Jesus is intermixing, and best friends, Mary, Martha, Lazarus. Jesus is spending his time with bummer lambs. Or let's talk about the poor, the bummer lambs of his day. Jesus' teaching, he humanized the poor. His first point in his 5-point mission in his first sermon was, I have come to bring good news to the poor. If it's not good news to the poor, it's not good news. And their tremendous concern for the well-being of the poor and the disenfranchised. Spirit of the Lord is upon me because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. We're looking at his disciples. Blessed are you who are poor, for yours is the kingdom of heaven. When you give a banquet, invite, first, the poor, the crippled, the lame, the bummer lamb people, the blind, and you will be blessed. They can't repay you. They can't give you anything, but you will be repaid at the resurrection of the righteous. Or the bummer lamb people of the day, the unclean. The holiness code in Jesus' day was you keep your hands clean. You don't touch anything that was filthy. You don't touch anything that was dirty. You don't touch especially diseased, because then you'll get contaminated. And the more pure you kept yourself, the holier you were. And Jesus flips that upside down. And he says, no, I just don't heal lepers. I touch these bummer lambs. I touch them. I bring them to my breast. And Jesus takes the unclean, the bummer lambs, and touches them and anoints them. Or, that was a hard one, because it's hard to see these people as bummer lambs, but there's the very people that are doing the oppression, the oppressors themselves, don't know it. But they're the bummerest of the bummer lambs in some ways themselves. The tax collectors, the centurions. Jesus spends time with these. Nobody can figure out why. Even goes to home, even puts a tax collector on his inner circle team. Matthew the tax collector. You could not even receive change from a tax collector because it was so filthy, because they were so despised in the culture of the day. And Jesus goes, not only goes to his house, like, Zacchaeus, come down. And he invites himself over. I'm going to your house. And you better have some food there when I get there. The oppressed themselves and those that actually were deemed as enemies. I mean, the Samaritans. This is a racial thing in Jesus' day. Hatred between Samaritans and the Jews. And when Jesus told the teacher of the law that loving your neighbor was as important part of fulfilling the law, the neighbor asked Jesus, well, who was his neighbor? And Jesus goes, well, let me tell you a story. The story is of a Samaritan who's the hero of the story. And when Jesus ends up alone with a Samaritan woman at the local watering hole, he has his most extensive theological conversation with anyone in all of the Gospels. He tears down the walls that keep bummer people away. He tears down the walls of division and reconciles the divisions between Jews and Gentiles. Or as Paul put it, for he himself is our peace, who has made the two groups one, and has destroyed the barrier, the dividing wall of hostility by setting aside in his flesh the law with his command and regulations, with its commands and regulations. His purpose was to create in himself one new humanity. Jesus came to bring together one and to birth one new humanity and to put a death to our hostility. And then we have the outcast and the oppressed and the prisoners. And this Lent, it's important for us to realize that Jesus' love for bummer people is reflected not just in those bummer shepherds, which were the lowest of they were barely clean, the lowest of all the Jews were seen as shepherds because they were so filthy and they never showed up at synagogue or temple. But he began his life with the shepherds. A bummer lamb savior, if you will. And he ended his life as he began. He died as he lived, surrounded by bummer lambs, surrounded by two thieves, one of whom became the first convert in heaven is a convict. One of whom today you'll be with me in paradise because he took them in to his arms. And one of them responded and lifted up his head from it being brought low. By the way, just as Jesus himself, what you remember what he said? He answered and said unto them, Mark 14:48, "Are you come out as against a thief?" Are you come out? This is when they arrested him in the garden. Are you come out as against a thief? What do you think I am, a thief? Well, in one way, there are three thieves on that cross because Jesus is that third thief that stole from the poor their last place at the table, that stole from the woman at the well her shame and her guilt, that stole from the leper his isolation and ostracizement. And the greatest heist in history is when he stole from the devil his power over you and me, and he stole from the grave its sting of victory. You got to watch out for that third thief, that third bummer lamb. The Lamb of God that takes away the sins of the world. By the way, for the rest of their life, you always know a bummer lamb by one thing. When you have a flock, you want to know who the bummer lambs are? When the shepherd calls his sheep, the sheep that are the first to come and the quickest to respond are the bummer lamb sheep. You always know the bummer lambs because they are the first ones to come to the shepherd, because the bummer lambs know best the shepherd's voice. Oh, I want to be a bummer lamb. I want to know best the shepherd's voice. I want to come when he calls. I want to hear it when he calls. I want to be a bummer lamb.